All right, so Freemasons. When you hear that, what pops into your head? Like secret societies,
Mm.
right? Ancient rituals, all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
it's like the classic image, right?
Totally. But you know what? Today, we're going to dig a bit deeper. We're going past those symbols and those secret handshakes, We're diving into some, honestly, really forward-thinking stuff about tolerance and education, especially for the time period we're talking about.
And we've got a pretty hefty book to guide us. This guy, Albert Pike, wrote Morals and Dogma of Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. It came out way back in 1878.
1878, wow. But don't worry, we're not reading all 800-something pages. We're zeroing in on just one chapter, all about the illustrious elect of the 15th degree. And that's where Pike really gets into it. Like, what does tolerance actually mean? And it's pretty surprising, actually, how much it still resonates today.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing about these deep dives. We find these little nuggets of like timeless wisdom in these unexpected places.
It's true. So, okay, get us started. What does Pike have to say about tolerance?
Well, first off, he doesn't just mean accepting different opinions, which, let's be real, that can feel kind of passive, like, okay, whatever you think.
Yeah.
Pike's talking about something way more active. It's about recognizing that other people have the right to hold those different views, even if you totally disagree with them.
And that's a big deal, especially back then. Think about it, the late 1800s. We're talking about a time when religious persecution was still a thing.
Big time. I mean, you've got the persecution of the early Christians, the Spanish Inquisition. All that stuff was likely on Pike's mind when he was writing.
So it makes you realize these weren't just like abstract ideas for him. It was about protecting people's basic right to think differently in a world that wasn't always cool with that.
Right. And that's really at the heart of Freemasonry. Pike and Masons in general, they believed in judging people by like how they act, their character, not by their religion or their personal beliefs.
Which is something we kind of take for granted now, but back then, pretty radical. But he doesn't stop there. Pike actually challenges us to think even more critically about our own belief systems.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. He basically says that nobody, no matter how sure they are, can ever truly say they have a lock on absolute truth. And his reasoning is, it makes you think.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's basically saying that the things we believe often come from, like, our upbringing, our culture, our parents, what we were taught. Not necessarily because we sat down and thought, I've weighed all the evidence and this is the logical conclusion.
So he's encouraging some serious self-reflection here, like, why do I believe the things I believe? Have I ever really questioned this?
Exactly. It's about being humble enough to admit we might be wrong about some things, and that being open to different perspectives is how we grow.
Which, man, talk about a message that's still relevant. I mean, think about it. Echo chambers, social media bubbles. It's so easy to just surround yourself with stuff that already agrees with you.
Right?
It's like we build these walls around ourselves.
Totally. And the thing is, Pike doesn't just leave us there, He doesn't just say, question everything and then walks away. He actually gives us some ideas for how we can, like, coexist even with all these differences.
Okay, I like where this is going. So what's his solution? How do we do that?
Well, he talks about this idea of a universal moral code. Like, instead of getting hung up on different religions and dogmas, he says we need a shared set of principles, something that goes beyond all that.
The universal moral code, huh? So what's in it? What are the big ideas?
A few things. He talks about believing in some kind of higher power, right? Living a good and virtuous life and practicing charity. He says these are things you find in a lot of different belief systems.
Yeah, it's like finding those common threads, those points of connection, even when it seems like people are really different on the surface.
Exactly. And Pike, he's not just like throwing these ideas out there. He gets really specific about how this moral code should actually look in real life.
Okay, so how does he connect those dots? How do you live out this universal moral code?
Well, he gives some pretty vivid examples. Like, he says a good Mason is going to be a good citizen, someone who cares about their community, someone who's a good parent, good family member, someone who runs their business honestly. And he keeps coming back to charity, being generous with your actions, not just your words.
So it's not enough to just, like, think the right things. You have to live it out, right? Show it in how you treat other people.
100%. He's all about walking the walk. Be the best version of yourself. Treat everyone with kindness and respect, even when you don't agree with them.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And Pike actually believed that one of the most powerful tools we have for this whole thing, for building a more tolerant world, is education. He thought it was like the antidote to intolerance.
He was big on knowledge, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, completely. He thought ignorance leads to fear and prejudice. So the more we encourage people to learn, to be curious, the better off we'll be.
And it's not just about, like, memorizing facts, right? It's about using what you learn to actually grow as a person, to
Hmm.
make the world a better place.
Exactly. And you know what's really cool? Pike actually envisioned Masonic lodges as being these centers of learning.
Oh, wow. Like, instead of just rituals and stuff, he wanted them to be more like, what, ancient schools of philosophy or something?
Kinda, yeah. He wanted them to be places where people could come together from all walks of life and just like debate, explore new ideas, like really use their brains. He really thought these lodges could be like a training ground for a more tolerant and enlightened world. He said even the smallest acts of kindness, the smallest effort to learn something new, it all adds up.
He's like, even small acts matter, right? You don't have to solve all the world's problems by yourself.
Right. He uses this analogy of the widow's mite. It's the story from the Bible where a poor widow, she donates just a tiny bit of money to the temple.
I think I remember that one.
Yeah, and even though it wasn't much, she gave everything she had. Right. And that's what mattered.
Just the thought that counts.
Exactly. So even the smallest contribution, if it's from the heart, if you really mean it, it can make a difference. That's what Pike believed. So like if we take one thing from him, it's that each of us, we can do something. Every act of kindness, every attempt to learn and grow, it all goes toward making the world a little more tolerant, a little more enlightened.
It really is about the intention, isn't it? Like, are you making the effort, even in small ways, to be more tolerant, more generous, more, what was it?
Committed to knowledge.
All right. It's not always easy, though.
It definitely isn't. It's a process, right? Like, you're not going to get it perfect all the time.
And it's those moments when you mess up or you get challenged, that's when it's really important to remember what Pike was saying. Like, when someone comes at you with a totally different perspective, or you run into a belief that really pushes your buttons,
That's when you have to remember tolerance is active, not passive. You have to choose it, even when it's hard.
it's a muscle, right? You got to work it out.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up our deep dive into Pike and this whole morals and dogma thing, what's the one big takeaway for our listeners? If they only remember one thing about tolerance and education, what should it be?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's this. The world feels really divided right now, right? Everyone's got their own ideology, their own little corner of the internet.
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in those echo chambers.
For sure. But Pike, he gives us this model for, like, how to build bridges instead of walls.
Instead of just like yelling at each other from across the divide.
Right. And it starts with that active tolerance we were talking about, choosing to see the other person, even when you disagree. And then education is huge, like actually trying to learn about different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world.
Because knowledge is power, right?
It really is. And, more than anything, I think Pike would want us to remember that we've got more in common than we think. Like, underneath all those different beliefs, we all share these basic human values, right?
We all want to be happy. We want the best for our families.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we can focus on that, on those common threads, I think that's where real progress starts.
It's a good message. It's a hopeful message. And to think, we found it in a book about Freemasons from the 1800s.
You never know where you'll find wisdom, right?
That's so true. Well, that about wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Keep those brains working and keep asking those tough questions. We'll see you next time.